The story is still told in weight rooms across California. A 280-pound bodybuilder, veins like cables, arms the size of most men's thighs, walked across a crowded gym floor, got 3 inches from Chuck Norris's face, and shoved him hard in front of everyone. Nobody filmed it. No photographer caught what happened next. But the dozen men who were there that afternoon tell it the same way every single time. 6 seconds later, all 280 pounds of that man was on the floor, gasping, staring at the ceiling, wondering what in God's name had just hit him. This is that story. It was the early 1980s. Chuck Norris was already famous, missing in action, the karate tournaments, the reputation that had spread from coast to coast through martial arts circles like smoke through a dojo. But fame, as it turns out, can work against you in certain rooms. Because in a hardcore bodybuilding gym in the San Fernando Valley, fame means nothing if you don't look the part. And Chuck Norris, compact, quiet, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and running shoes that morning, did not look the part. He wasn't there to perform. He wasn't there to be recognized. He trained like he always trained, methodically, efficiently, with the kind of focused silence that serious fighters carry into every room they enter. No entourage, no fanfare, just a man doing work. That's what made him invisible to the wrong people. The bodybuilder's name, and several versions of this story give him different names, which is how you know it's passed through enough mouths to become legend, was a regular at that gym, a fixture, 6'3", 280 pounds of competition-ready muscle, the kind of man who parted crowds without asking. He had the respect that comes from size alone, the unspoken social gravity that makes smaller men step aside and look away. In that gym, he was the ceiling, the standard by which every other man in the room measured himself. And then, one Tuesday morning, someone pointed out the quiet guy working cable rows in the corner. That's Chuck Norris. Here's what nobody understood yet about that moment, and this is the part that matters. The bodybuilder didn't see a martial arts legend. He didn't see a man who had trained under Bruce Lee, who had fought and won in full-contact karate when full-contact karate was genuinely dangerous, who had spent 15 years conditioning his body and his mind into something that looked calm on the outside and was catastrophic on the inside. He saw a movie star, a guy from posters, someone who threw fake punches for cameras, and in his world, a world built entirely around visible size, a man who wasn't physically imposing wasn't worth respecting. He made a comment first, loud enough for the room to hear. "Doesn't look so tough to me." A few guys laughed, the kind of laugh men give when they're not sure if they should, but they don't want to be the one who stays quiet. Chuck didn't react, didn't look up, kept his hands on the cable, kept his breathing even, finished his set. That was somehow worse. Because when a man like that makes a public comment and the target doesn't flinch, doesn't look scared, doesn't look angry, doesn't even look interested, there are only 2 ways to read it. Either the target is genuinely unbothered, or the target didn't hear. The bodybuilder decided it was the second option. It was easier that way. He crossed the floor. The gym didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way a fire goes out, section by section, until there was nothing left. The clang of a barbell being set down, a treadmill that someone reached over and switched off, a conversation that just stopped mid-sentence. He stopped 2 feet from Chuck Norris. "Hey, movie star."
Chuck looked up, calm, unhurried. The expression of a man who has been in enough genuinely dangerous situations that this one didn't register on the scale. "I'm talking to you." The bodybuilder gestured around the gym, at the weights, at the men watching, at the space that was clearly his in every social sense of that word. "This isn't a film set. You want to train here, you train with real people." Chuck said something quiet. The men standing closest said later they could barely hear it. One version of the story says he said, "Okay." Just that. One word. Another version says he said nothing at all. What every single version agrees on, and this is the thread that runs through every telling of this story, the detail that never changes no matter who's telling it, is what happened next. The bodybuilder put both hands on Chuck Norris's chest and shoved. What happened in the next 6 seconds would be talked about in that gym for the next 20 years. The shove landed. Chuck took a half step back, not from fear, the witnesses said, but from physics. 280 pounds of force requires some acknowledgement from the laws of nature, but that half step was the last thing that went according to anyone's expectations. Here's where the story splits from ordinary and becomes something else. Chuck Norris didn't wind up, didn't step back into a fighting stance. didn't announce what was coming with his eyes or his shoulders or any of the telegraphing that untrained men do before they throw something. He simply moved. Weight shifted, not backward, forward, into the space the shove had created. A trained fighter uses your energy. You push him back, you've just handed him momentum. Chuck closed the distance before the bodybuilder's arms had even fully retracted. The left hand came up. Not a punch, a redirect. A palm against the inside of the bodybuilder's right arm. A motion so small and so fast that 3 of the men watching said afterward they didn't see it happen. They only saw the result. The bodybuilder's own arm was now working against him. 280 pounds is an enormous amount of force, but only if you can direct it. If someone with the right training redirects that force sideways, it stops being your weapon and becomes your liability. The big man stumbled, one foot crossing behind the other, his balance suddenly somewhere he hadn't put it. Chuck's right knee drove forward, a single controlled strike, aimed not at the body, but at the outside of the bodybuilder's lead leg. Not a stomp, not a brawl move, a technique. Clean, precise, the kind of thing you only learn after 10,000 repetitions make it automatic. The big man's leg buckled. Both hands now, controlled, measured, guided rather than slammed that enormous frame toward the floor. There's a difference between a trained fighter taking someone down and a brawl. A brawl is chaos. This wasn't chaos. This was a man applying 20 years of refined technique to a problem that had presented itself, solving it with the minimum force required, nothing more. 280 pounds of bodybuilder was on the floor of that gym, flat on his back, staring up at the fluorescent lights, his chest heaving, his body trying to remember what it was supposed to do next. Chuck Norris stood over him, not in anger, not performing for the room. He looked down for 1 breath, 2. Then he reached down, offered a hand and said, and this part every witness agrees on, "You all right?" The gym stayed silent for a long moment. Not the nervous silence from before, something different. The silence that follows something that doesn't fit the categories you had available. Nobody in that room had a file for what they'd just seen. A man 100 pounds lighter, with no apparent effort, no rage, no visible exertion, had just put the biggest person in the room on the ground in less time than it takes to draw a whole breath. The bodybuilder didn't take the hand right away. He lay there, processing, his body cataloging the inventory of what had just happened to it. The off-balance stumble, the leg buckle, the floor arriving faster than gravity should have allowed. When he finally got up, he didn't say anything.
Not a word. He walked to the water fountain, drank, and then went back to his bench. He trained for another 40 minutes. He never looked in Chuck's direction again. Chuck went back to cable rows. 3 minutes later, the gym sounds had all returned. Weights, machines, conversations, and to a stranger walking in off the street, nothing in that room looked different than it had 20 minutes earlier. Except every man who had been there knew exactly what he had witnessed, and none of them would forget it. Word spread the way these things always spread, not through newspapers or broadcasts, but through the specific telegraph of gyms and dojos and late-night conversations after training sessions. Someone told someone. That someone told 3 more. The story picked up details in some tellings, shed them in others, but the core never changed. The shove, the 6 seconds, the floor, the offered hand. No footage, no article, no official record of any kind. Just the story, living on its own, the way the real ones always do. There's something this story keeps coming back to, no matter which version you hear. It's not really about the bodybuilder. He was just a man who made a common mistake, the oldest mistake in the room actually. He read the surface and decided that was the whole story. He saw the size and decided that settled the question. Chuck Norris had spent his entire life making that mistake available to people. Because that's what genuine martial arts mastery looks like from the outside. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't carry visible warning signs. The man who has truly internalized 20 years of technique doesn't walk into a room and look dangerous. He walks in and looks like a quiet guy in a gray t-shirt who wants to finish his cable rows and go home. The danger is invisible until it isn't. That's what separates a fighter from someone who has learned to perform fighting. Performers need the costume. Performers need the posture and the presence and the reputation visible on their body like a uniform.
A real fighter needs none of it because the capability is in the muscle memory, in the automatic responses, in the 1,000 reps that turn technique into reflex. 6 seconds isn't a long time, but it's longer than you think if every second contains a decision made faster than conscious thought. Chuck Norris didn't react to that shove in the gym that Tuesday morning. He responded. And that difference between reacting and responding is 20 years of training, compressed into a moment so brief that half the room wasn't sure they'd seen it. Whether this story happened exactly the way it's been told, whether it was a Tuesday or Thursday, a San Fernando Valley gym or somewhere else entirely, whether the bodybuilder's leg buckled at second 4 or second 5, none of that changes what the story is actually about. It's about the fact that real skill doesn't need to be visible. It just needs to be there when the moment arrives. And on that morning, in that gym, when 280 pounds of misplaced confidence crossed the floor and put its hands on the wrong man, the skill was there. It was always going to be there.